southern Scotland, and with a bit of shelter from the breeze, it should feel okay in the sunshine. And for Northern Ireland, yes, there will be a few showers dotted about, but most places will have a dry and bright Saturday afternoon, if a little on the chilly side. Away from northern Scotland, showers will quickly fade this evening, with temperatures falling sharply after sunset, and that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls, and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate, and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Hello and welcome. Cheers very much for your company. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on TV, DAB and online. Today we'll be discussing the gender pay gap. On average, women earn 90p for every pound earned by men, according to official data. But does this reporting actually help the problem or exacerbate it? We'll also have privatization, the latest on Ukraine, and no-fault divorces. Does marriage matter anymore? On today's show. But first, it's the news with Simon Pusey.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Ukrainian officials have urged civilians in the eastern Luhansk region to flee as Russia is amassing new forces. The governor there warned that Russia is preparing a new offence as shelling increases in recent days. Ukraine has increasingly been warning that Russia plans to intensify attacks in the country's east and south after withdrawing its troops from areas to the north of the capital, Kyiv. Meanwhile, the latest British military intelligence shows that Russia continues to hit Ukrainian non-combatants such as civilians. It follows a Russian rocket strike on a train station in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, which killed at least 52 people, including 5 children, and injured more than 100. The Ministry of Defence says Russia's ambitions to establish a land corridor between Crimea and the Donbass continue to be thwarted by Ukrainian resistance. In other news, climate group Extinction Rebellion say they will be holding daily protests in London in a bid to end all new fossil-fuelled investments. Activists closed Tower Bridge yesterday after suspending themselves from the bridge alongside a banner. We can go live to today's protests now with GB News' London reporter Alice Porter. Alice, what's the scene where you are?
Well, central London has absolutely ground to a halt. We had activists moving from Marble Arch all the way along through to Oxford Circus, very much in the heart of London. But behind me, there are activists who are sitting down on Regent Street, which is completely blocking off a major road in and out of London. There's been traffic at an absolute standstill all around this area. There are taxis here which are not able to pick up passengers at all. I was speaking with bus drivers and taxi drivers earlier. Many of them are frustrated that they cannot go about their business. Now, Extinction Rebellion, they did warn that they would be doing more road blockades than ever before, and they say this is because they want to put pressure on the government to stop their reliance on fossil fuels and to stop investing in new fossil fuel technology. But the frustration from so many people who live around here, people who are working, people trying to have a normal day sightseeing in London, the frustration is immensely palpable because so many activists from all over the country have descended and are causing complete chaos right here in the centre of London.
Alice Porter with that update live there in central London. Thank you very much indeed for that. Labour says the Chancellor and his family have potentially saved tens of millions of pounds in taxes due to his wife's non-domicile status. The Chancellor's wife, Akshata Murthy, has said she will now pay UK tax on all her worldwide income, despite the status exempting her from doing so. It's as Rishi Sunak admitted to holding a US green card while in office. He said it was returned after he sought guidance and that he followed all laws and paid taxes in full. The royal family has released a poetic tribute to mark the first anniversary of the Duke of Edinburgh's death. The poem, written by the poet laureate Simon Armitage, is called The Patriarchs, an Elegy. He died on this day last year at Windsor Castle, just months short of his 100th birthday.
Husbands to duty, they unrolled their plans across billiard tables and vehicle bonnets, regrouped at breakfast. What their secrets were was everyone's guess and nobody's business. Great-grandfathers from birth, in time they became both inner core and outer case in a family heirloom of nesting dolls.
Simon Armitage there, remembering Prince Philip. A Dutch teenager who disappeared after going diving off the coast of Malaysia has died, according to his British father. Officials say 14-year-old Nathan Chesters likely drifted into Indonesian waters. Chesters was reported missing on Wednesday afternoon, about an hour into a training dive with his father, a French woman and their Norwegian diving instructor. The three other divers were rescued hours after the initial missing report. The first all-private astronaut team has docked with the International Space Station in an historic mission. This NASA footage shows the SpaceX rocket ship arriving a short time ago. The three passengers, one former NASA astronaut and three paying customers, are visiting the station 250 miles above Earth for 8 days of science and biomedical research. And that live shot there, you can see people making maintenance there aboard the spaceship. Now, today's Grand National has all eyes on the jockey Rachel Blackmore to retain her title, riding Minella Times, who won last year's race, making her the first woman to win an Aintree. Blackmore will be keen to continue her success after winning the Gold Cup at Cheltenham a few weeks ago. Other favourites include Delta Work and Run Wild Fred. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show today. Is it time to end the gender pay gap reporting measures? These figures were released this week. They show that on average, women earned 90 pence for every pound that men did. Conservative MP Mark Francois, a member of the Defence Select Committee, will join me to discuss the latest in Ukraine and react to the Prime Minister's strong words for Russia in our exclusive GB News interview. A few weeks ago, Mr. Francois was on the show calling for defence spending in the Chancellor's spring statement. That didn't happen, folks. I wonder what he'll have to say. We'll also be talking about Rishi Sunak's plummeting popularity as well. The government has announced it wants to privatise Channel 4. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has said that government ownership is holding it back. We'll be going back to basics this afternoon to find out exactly what privatisation is. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd always love to know your thoughts on everything from the gender pay gap, Rishi Sunak, you name it. Get in touch, tweet me at GBNews, or you can email me gbviews@gbnews.uk. Watch us online on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook as well. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Cheers very much. Well, folks, I think it's safe to say that it's been quite the taxing week for most of us, with millions of workers around the UK facing a hike in national insurance contributions. At the same time as the worst cost of living crisis for generations tearing inflationary chunks from our bank balances. But we're not talking about that struggle in the press today. We're talking instead about the tax struggles of Akshata Murthy, Chancellor Rishi Sunak's wife. A tax debate that's led to a decision by Murthy to pay UK tax on dividends from her 690 million quid stake in an Indian big tech company founded by her dad. Personally, I think it's wrong to go after a politician's wife. His wife and children aren't sitting around the Treasury table deciding whether or not to hike taxes, and it should be said that there's no suggestion of any wrongdoing here as far as the law is concerned. When it comes to a non-domiciled tax status, you still pay taxes on income made in this country and taxes made on income made in India. All that seems to have concluded here is that Murthy will pay more tax in Britain, and Labour will still claim a win and use this leak to damage the Tory brand as being out of touch with real Britain. This is a wealthy Chancellor that doesn't understand opposition politicians will wax lyrical. When a tax status of a private individual is revealed in an unprecedented leak, I'm minded to say that someone is baying for Sunak's political career here, especially ahead of May's local elections. Local elections that, it's safe to say, could potentially be disastrous for a beleaguered mid-term government. The line from opposition politicians will be that the chief tax raiser's family has tried to dodge taxes that the rest of us are all forced to pay here in Britain. It suggests a political naivety, though, I think it's safe to say, in Rishi Sunak, that he didn't see this coming sooner. I remember a scene from a Conservative Party conference in which Boris Johnson was handed a non-reusable coffee cup, only to have it snatched from his hands by an aide next to him before he could take a single sip from this non-environmentally friendly receptacle and be photographed doing so. Rishi Sunak should have seen this coming. He should have realised that his family's tax affairs would be his non-reusable coffee cup, and have had the foresight to actually dispose of it earlier in his career. All safe to say, I think. Labour may well have a point there. I do fear, though, that we're much too quick to lurch to the politics of envy here, forgetting that one person's poverty isn't caused by one person's wealth. Having those fathers that have made vast fortunes in tech companies elsewhere seek to make their lives here in this country, it's good for Britain, right, to have the daughters of these wealthy billionaires, squillionaires, whatever, actually come and make their lives here. One minister reportedly told The Times that Sunak was simply too rich to be Prime Minister. Well, I'm sorry, but how rich is too rich? Personal wealth doesn't dictate a person's understanding of how things like energy bills and taxes impact those at the very bottom. I dare say, folks, controversially though this may be, that millionaire Sunak understands, he gets the plight of a family in County Durham more than most of the middle classes in our country that perhaps are reading certain newspapers. We simply must not become a nation that shuns high wealth individuals out of envy or spite. Dismissing the wealth as being unable to to understand. Many of us feel a deep sense of solidarity with the people of Ukraine, for example, but we've never been there. Yet we'd like to assume that we understand that life must be pretty awful if Russians waltz into your nation with rockets and rifles. I think that should go to really highlight that you don't have to be Ukrainian to understand the plight, even more so than you have to be wealthy to understand what it's like to be poor. Food for thought there, folks. I think food for thought. Now, folks, on that theme of wealth, should we stop reporting on the gender pay gap? The latest figures suggest that women earn 90p for every pound that men do. Well, here to discuss this, I'm joined by political commentator Emily Carver and Susan Smith, who's the co-director of For Women Scotland. Susan, can I start with you, please? Should we actually end the reporting on the gender pay gap here? Aren't we just creating bureaucratic burdens for already struggling businesses?
No, I think the data needs to be collected. The issue is whether or not it's robust. So monitoring pay gap is very important for monitoring whether or not women are disadvantaged, whether there is sexism within companies, or indeed whether people are being paid equivalent amounts for an equivalent job. Glasgow Council came unstuck on this over the past few years because they were paying equivalent jobs which were deemed women's jobs significantly less than jobs that were deemed to be men's jobs, and where there were traditionally higher numbers of men and women employed in those two different areas. The issue is whether we are causing problems with how we're collecting the data. And at the moment in Scotland, people are not collecting data on sex, they're collecting data on other things. So there is an issue with how that data can be processed. And then there's an issue of whether that's going to lead to any actual structural change, because in order for this to be a worthwhile exercise, you have to be able to then analyse it and determine whether there are social issues or whether this is something that companies can do more to encourage more women back into the workforce in later life and potentially benefit from a wealth of experience.
Emily, you've heard what Susan's had to say there. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I do assume that you're a woman. Surely you would benefit, Emily, from this gender pay gap report and actually making the workplace a more equal place for a woman to be.
I think the problem is that the data doesn't show whether women and men are being paid the same for the same role, nor can it be used to decipher whether discrimination is at play. And that's because this government-mandated reporting doesn't show whether a firm is paying men and women different amounts for the same role. It compares the difference in women and men's average earnings across an entire organisation at one point in time, regardless of their role. So it doesn't compare like with like. It does give you a slight idea of the relative distribution of pay levels between men and women, but you're not comparing the same role at the same role, the same level of experience, all these different aspects of someone's employment. It's just taking sort of meaningless averages and then trying to insinuate, therefore, that there must be discrimination at play. And that's the problem. We see the media and often feminist organizations representing this data in a misleading way. It's used often to suggest that women are getting paid less than men for the same job, which is illegal, and that's not what the data actually shows us. And we see campaign groups like the Freesat Society use the data in really quite silly ways to claim that at one point in the year, women effectively stop getting paid as compared to their male counterparts. And it seems to me that this data isn't particularly enlightening. It's more just used as a lobbying tool for activists.
So, Susan, you've heard what Emily's had to say there. Are you concerned that these measures are actually convincing a new generation of women in the workplace that actually the cards are stacked against them, that they basically needn't bother because there's a certain point in the year at which they're working for free compared to men?
Look, I think a lot of what Emily said is absolutely true. That this is, as she said, a bit of a blunt tool. I don't think that means you throw the whole thing out. I think it means you try to make it better. And we have a lot of issues with data collection, as I've said. But if you get rid of it entirely, you remove any, let's be honest, there are companies out there who are not really going to care too much whether they have sex discrimination measures in place. And if you get rid of this entirely, you are going to make it harder to hold people to account going forward. So I think, yes, it is true. It's not comparing like to like, and there are distinct issues with how this has been interpreted. But that's an argument in my mind for making it better rather than getting rid of it in totality.
So, Emily, is it your view that this is just used by an activist class to perpetuate victim narratives around women?
I think it can be, certainly. I do see that from some feminist groups where they try to name and shame companies for having large gender pay gaps. And it can be quite unfair for some businesses. The classic example is EasyJet. They've got an absolutely massive gender pay gap, and that's been named and shamed in the press previously. But that gender pay gap is down to the fact that more men are pilots, which of course takes more experience and skill than being cabin crew, which is dominated by females. And so that's why we get that appearance of a gender pay gap. And my concern is not just that this is a big regulatory burden for these businesses, but also what do we want? How do we want companies to fix this? What I've heard from people in business is that there's a sort of move to almost manipulate these statistics because they have to, appear to have a smaller pay gap. So what do? Well, you can parachute women into higher paid roles in an organization rather than based on merit. They may not necessarily be suitable for those roles, but it would improve their gender pay gaps. Or they could even decide to, discriminate against men for higher paid roles. You could have arbitrary targets. But, businesses' priorities isn't about social engineering. Their priority number one has to be to get the best person for the job, because their priority at the end of the day is to make a profit. So I do worry about why we're collating this data and how we're going to interpret it and what measures that will lead to.
Oh, before I let Susan come back to that, Emily, I just want to ask you, as a young woman, research actually suggests that women who have children have been found to earn almost half of their previous salaries in the 6 years after giving birth, known as the motherhood wage penalty. Do you worry about your options and your career prospects after potentially having children?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. I think childcare is a massive issue for women. It often doesn't make financial sense for women to go back to work full time because childcare costs more than their salary might, which is a ridiculous state of affairs. And there are many reasons for why that are that we won't go into now. But, I think there's also the case that women make different choices to men, and that should be something that feminists celebrate rather than condemn or try to necessarily change. For many women, once they've had children, their priorities in terms of their career do naturally change. They may decide to go into part-time work, have more flexible work. They're less likely to take on the overtime. They're less likely to potentially want to keep climbing that corporate ladder. So I think the problem with this data is that it doesn't reflect that. We know that there isn't a gender pay gap for people in their 20s between men and women. So it is really that motherhood gap, and we can make things easier for women, sure, and we can ask men to step up more when it comes to childcare, but I don't think we should be casting judgments on women's choices.
Yeah, Susan, isn't that the fundamental point here, that women are making choices and women are still childbearers? Contrary to popular belief, men cannot get pregnant, as you well know. So, Susan, isn't this just women making choices, and these pay gap statistics are actually not telling us the full picture?
It can be women making choices, but I think sometimes those choices are almost enforced. I came from a very high level career in my 20s, which was unsustainable when I became a mother. And so I speak from experience of knowing that there was going to be one person in the family who had to stop. Now, for most families these days, it's not possible to exist on a single salary. So there's social pressure to push women back to the workplace, but there isn't the structural help to keep them in there. And actually, going forward, I think this is going to affect men as well as women, that there have been, and I've heard of situations now where the father becomes the primary carer for a child. And they have the same issues that women do about returning to the workplace. They have the same issues about maintaining their career. And because it's a lesser known, it occurs a lot less than women giving up their career, there maybe isn't the same pressure on it. But I think that, there are a lot of women in later life who can bring back experience. And what they tend to be doing is starting up their own company, starting to do different things. And I think that can be a choice, but it can also be something that they have no real option on, because there are programs to help women get back into the workplace, but they are not as robust as they could be. I think one thing that lockdown has shown is how flexible working is possible.
Yeah.
And that it is possible to adjust hours. And, all these things are probably good for men and for women. So if we are able to take apart and say, why is it that women have this maternity issue, and also going forward into menopause, there's a lot of health issues relating to that which are not dealt with, and that's a whole other issue. That is a struggle as well for women in the workplace. But I think looking at more flexible working is good for men and women.
Exactly, yeah. And that's another conversation to have, I think, but we sadly are out of time. That was the political commentator Emily Carver and Susan Smith, co-director for Women Scotland. Thank you very much for their contribution there. Next, we'll be joined by the Tory MP, Mark Francois, who sits on the Defence Select Committee. Plenty to discuss with him. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking bright for many, with the majority of the showers fading away. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest of England, and it will be a fine end to the day here with plenty of sunshine. It will quickly begin to feel chilly though once the sun begins to set. Moving eastwards, and there could be 1 or 2 showers around first thing this evening, but these will quickly ease away, leaving clear skies. Across then into Wales, and any showers will fade away, with most of the cloud also melting away, leaving a clear but chilly evening. Any showers across the Midlands will tend to become confined to northern and eastern parts, with skies largely clear elsewhere. Once the sun sets, skies will clear further, giving a cold night for all. After an afternoon of sunshine and showers, northern England will see a dry evening with skies turning increasingly clear. Just like elsewhere, it will be a chilly end to the day with a frost forming. Moving into Scotland, and the showers will continue across some northern and eastern areas, with these wintry across the higher ground. Elsewhere, there will be some late sunshine to end the day. And Northern Ireland will also see some late sunshine, and apart from the odd, very isolated shower, it will be a dry end to the day for most. Overnight, most will be dry and clear, leading to a cold night with widespread frost developing, especially in the countryside. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London EC3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Now, this morning, folks, we heard the Prime Minister speaking exclusively to us on GB News from the Thatcher Room in number 10 Downing Street about what the UK can do to help Ukraine in their fight. The Prime Minister...
we've got to make sure that Putin fails in his catastrophic attempt to conquer, subdue, destroy another country, a neighbouring Slavic country. And the UK is not... in the business of engaging itself or NATO in direct conflict with Russia. That would not be sensible. But what we can do is give them maximum economic, political and military support to Ukrainians to defend themselves.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking there exclusively to GB News presenters and Tory MPs Esther McVey and Philip Davies. You can find that full interview on GB News' YouTube page and subscribe whilst you're there too. Super fast growing and rightly so. Now to get on to the latest in Ukraine and what the UK is actually doing to help, I'm joined, I'm delighted to say, by Mark Francois, the Conservative MP for Rayleigh and Wickford. Mark, thank you very much for your company. Now, you sit on the Defence Committee. There was a Russian rocket strike on a train station in eastern Ukraine in which at least 52 people have been killed with 100 more injured yesterday. Now, in response, the Prime Minister there saying that the UK is sending a further 100 million quid worth of high-grade military equipment to Ukraine's armed forces. Do you reckon we're doing enough? Can we supply any more weaponry? Is there a little more wiggle room here?
Well, I think that the UK is doing all that it practically can. The Prime Minister is quite right. We should help the Ukrainians to defend themselves. Ultimately, they're defending our freedom too. So we're providing more NLAWs, these superb anti-tank weapons. We're providing more Starstreak, anti-aircraft, anti-helicopter weapons. There is now talk we're going to provide them with Mastiff armoured vehicles. The best way to think of that, we use them in Afghanistan, it's like a super armoured truck. And it's designed particularly to protect the soldiers inside against IEDs and mine strikes. And if this war is going to switch to the east of Ukraine, to the Donbass, that's a very heavily mined area, or likely to be. So Mastiff would be a very practical vehicle. We're doing, I think, as much as we practically can. The question is, can we persuade our NATO allies to do likewise? I think there's a lot more that some of our NATO allies could do, particularly in terms of providing ex-Soviet equipment, like the Czechs have done, because most of the Ukrainian army is trained to use ex-Soviet kit. So where we can provide them with that, particularly things like tanks and armoured vehicles, that makes sense from their point of view because they don't have to retrain to use it. You know, they'd be pretty much good to go as soon as they got their hands on it.
Yeah, I mean, the French, of course, have a presidential election this weekend. Do you actually think, Mark, that France have really shown themselves up here and that what is the French narrative? And by the way, this is across the political spectrum in France, that actually they need to keep communications open with Putin. Do you think actually France have really let themselves and the NATO alliance down?
Well, I was critical of European politicians back in 2016 for interfering or trying to interfere in our EU referendum. So to be consistent, I'm not going to try and interfere in the French elections, you know, the first round of which I think is taking place tomorrow. But what I can say is that the Defence Committee, on which I serve, last week made a flying visit literally to Berlin and Warsaw to show solidarity with our NATO partners. And we saw, for instance, that the Germans are increasing their defence spending markedly. We've been criticising them for years for not spending 2% of GDP on defence, whereas France does. Now they've said they're going to do that. They've also announced a fund of 100 billion euros to re-equip the German armed forces, which, in some cases have run down. So, having criticised them for years for not having done that, I think, it would be churlish not to say that the Germans have done the right thing militarily, although it would take a while for that money to flow through. I think that the bigger challenge there is energy security. Yeah. And the Germans have been rather caught short by the Russian invasion because, as the world knows, they're highly dependent on Russian gas. So the Germans are doing a lot to improve their military security, though that will take time, and that will obviously contribute to NATO. I think where we're all pressing them now is what are they doing to improve their energy security so they don't have to keep buying gas from Russia. And I think there are more questions to answer. But, we have to hold Putin and his gang to account. So, ultimately we need, we're going to need some form of Nuremberg 2 rather than Nord Stream 2, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we also saw news this morning about the Chancellor Rishi Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy, has now said that she will pay UK taxes on her overseas income. This follows criticism, for those just joining us, over her non-domicile status, where she wasn't required by law to pay. How do you think the Chancellor and his wife have actually handled this, Mark?
Well, I think there's a policy here that, politicians who stand for public office expect to be criticised by their opponents. At the end of the day, we live in a democracy. Russia is now effectively a police state. Thank God we don't live in a country like that. We should never, ever take living in a free country for granted, Darren. My father was a D-Day veteran. He drummed that into me when I was a young boy. I've never forgotten it. So, point one, as we were talking about Russia, we live in a democracy where we can have legitimate criticism. That said, I do think that we should focus on the politicians rather than on their partners. And I think in this situation, it would be better to play the ball rather than the man, or in this case is the woman.
That this has actually damaged the Tory brand.
Well, as I say, I can only answer as I believe, and there's been a media pylon here. In the way that it works these days. But, at the end of the day, this lady is not the Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's a successful businesswoman in her own right. She's not taking economic decisions. She's not setting tax rates. So I don't really think that the media should be going after her in the way that they are. But that's just my own view.
Yeah, Mark, can I ask you really quickly in a sentence there? That Boris Johnson also said as a nation we're all getting a bit too fat. Now, there's been moves, I think, in a more sort of patrician Toryism to actually tell the nation that we need to get off our bums, basically, and move about a bit more. Are you worried about this sort of nanny statism, Mark?
Well, I'm not normally a great fan of what you could call the nanny state, Dan, but I'm on weak ground here because, I was in the gym yesterday and my PT was telling me I could do with losing a few pounds. So I'm probably not in the strongest possible position to give other people advice on that, if I'm honest to you.
Mark, thank you very much for your time today. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly, online and DAB radio. Next, we'll be going back to basics. The government says, actually, it wants to privatise Channel 4. Let's go on to that right now. We'll find out what privatisation is as well. So the government has announced that this week that it will privatise Channel 4. I personally was quite excited by this announcement. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries said that government ownership is actually holding Channel 4 back. Some believe that the quality of Channel 4's programmes would actually suffer from privatisation. So, what exactly does the term privatisation mean? Well, I'm absolutely delighted to say I'm joined by Dr. Madsen Piri, who is the president of the Adam Smith Institute. Madsen, hello, thank you for your time today. Now, the Adam Smith Institute, for those that don't know, was very highly influential in the 1980s, the halcyon days of privatisation in our own country. But what, Madsen, does the phrase actually mean in layman's terms?
Privatisation means taking something which is in the state sector of the economy and transferring it to the private sector of the economy. Now, in the old days, in the early days of Thatcherism, it was done to make industries and services more efficient and more responsive. It was done in order that they could attract new investment, to reinvest in infrastructure that always runs down under state ownership. It was done for all of those reasons. But at the heart of it was Margaret Thatcher's belief that the state really has no business owning industry, owning services, that should really be left to other people to do.
Yes, and as a private company, who could be the owner? Is it basically anyone with enough money could say, could Donald Trump, for example, Madsen, wild as that would be, say, well, actually, I quite like the look of Channel 4?
I do think the regulators would have some say if Donald Trump were to come along with an open checkbook. In fact, the regulators would obviously have a say in whichever bidder was approved of. Channel 4 is in a different position. It is owned by the state, but it's not funded by the state. It's funded from advertising. Now, the intention was always that government ownership of the channel, it was introduced to give more competition in broadcasting. It was always assumed that this was a kind of, so to speak, infancy period, and that once it was grown up, it would make its way into the private sector. Well, it's a 40-year-old grown up by now, so it really doesn't need mother's milk and attention anymore. So I think it is time for it to move to the private sector, and I think it will be more efficient, it'll be more responsive to the public, and it will have a more up-to-date business model. So the idea of financing it entirely from advertising is a bit outdated. They need subscriptions as well.
Channel 4 is basically the Prince Harry of broadcasting, and actually it needs to be set free from its father's checkbook and go off to perhaps reap the rewards of a modern broadcasting landscape, Madsen.
I don't think the Channel 4 executives would like insults like that levied at them by comparing them with Prince Harry. But yes, you are quite right. It's time for it to be on its own, to be free of state ownership, and to do the normal commercial things that other channels are doing successfully. It will be able to attract more money by going for subscriptions, and that will enable it to fund better programmes.
Are there any negatives in your view? I know you are unapologetic about your enthusiasm for privatisation and the good that it did after the 1980s revolution, but are there any negatives as far as the potential fragmentation of industries? If we look at the railways, for example, Madsen, some would argue that higher costs and poorer services are directly linked to privatisation.
Oh no, that's not true at all. Under state control, the railways were completely hideous. The infrastructure was run down by years of neglect. Governments have always got better things to do with their money than renew infrastructure. The rail companies now are carrying more than twice as many passengers as before, and they're a lot more attentive to time. They're a lot more attentive to comfort, more modern rolling stock. No, it's been a great improvement, and that is true for most of the privatised industries. And I'm sure it will be true for Channel 4 as well.
Yeah. The major privatisation wave under Thatcher that we've already mentioned there, that opened up much of Britain's industry to competition. And as you argue, Madsen, competition actually boosts standards and competitive prices for consumers. That actually created an economic boom in the 1980s. And in your opinion then, is the Channel 4 privatisation or potential privatisation, touted privatisation, a sign of good things to come for Britain?
I hope it is. You asked, were there any negatives? And the only negatives would be if it were privatised in such a way that it reduced competition. So we must be very careful about whose bid we accept and under what conditions and circumstances. If we can do it in a way that increases competition, increases consumer choice, gives the public more input into the type of programs they want, then it will indeed be a great thing for the future.
Just briefly then, what do you say to those who say, well, hang on a minute, there are Labour politicians and others who say, one, I don't want Channel 4 to be snapped up by some foreign investor, and secondly, that actually they're worried about the money that Channel 4 spends on British programming being lost?
I don't think it will be. I think, as I said, you bring in extra subscription money and they'll have more money to spend. I think it's quite likely that they'll be able to spend more money on British programmes if their executives think that is what the public want to see and hear. I don't know whether they do. I suspect they do, and therefore I would expect to see more such programmes.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Madsen Piri, for your time on the show this afternoon. Now, folks, next we'll be talking about no-fault marriages. We'll put them through our Scrap Reform Keep segment after this short break.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
It's now 2:44. Cheers very much for your company. But now, folks, it's time for our Scrap, Reform and Keep segment. We may be heading for a future in which we see fewer of those high-profile court battles in which celebrities fight it out in public to call time on their marriages and reach a healthy divorce settlement. Remember back in 2008 when Beatles singer Paul McCartney and Heather Mills slugged it out over their divorce. For those listening on radio, we were seeing pictures there of Heather walking out of court waving to journalists. The settlement ended up with Heather getting a £24 million payout. Well, this week, one of the biggest changes in divorce laws in decades has come into force. The launch of no-fault divorces for England and Wales comes after years of campaigning by family lawyers to make the process simpler and end the blame game. Well, I'm joined now by Karen Doveston, who's the interim chair at the Family Law Committee. Karen, before we get on to whether or not you want to actually scrap, reform or indeed keep the no-fault divorce laws that have just come in, can you take us back and how have the changes in the law actually been brought about? Why have people been calling for changes to what has been, I think, perhaps embedded in law for quite some time now.
You're absolutely right, Darren. The law was as of 1973, and it changed on the 6th of April to the new no-fault divorce. So now, if you want to be divorced, you make an application to the court again for a divorce, and you simply sign the statement that says the marriage is over and you would like to be divorced. Now, we're not unique in having this in our jurisdiction. All around the world, we're one of the last actually to move to no-fault divorce in that way. But prior to the 6th of April, unless you'd been separated for a period of between 2 and 5 years, if you wanted to get on with it and deal with it, you had to point the finger. One of you had to start the process, and the other one had to point the finger and say, you've done this, you've done that. So it's really very difficult. It just made a difficult situation worse, in my view.
Right. And is this something that you've been hoping for personally would come into force for a while?
Yes, I have. I've been a solicitor now for nearly 27 years, and I would say that most of my working life has been spent contributing to campaigns for trying to get this reform through as soon as possible. You can see the harm and upset that it causes for couples that are coming to get divorced, to be told, listen, you've worked through all the emotional heavy lifting, but now we need to go back again and rake over all that again to put it into a divorce petition. And it just opens old wounds. It really does.
Am I right in saying that a form of no-fault divorce exists in Scotland then, but these so-called blame rules will remain in force in the likes of Northern Ireland? Are we a disunited kingdom as far as divorce laws are concerned now?
Yes, it kind of. You're right that we have different jurisdictions. So England and Wales is one jurisdiction. So the law across the border in Scotland is different from the law in England, and the terms that we use are different as well. Even to the extent of, we call the parties applicants and respondents, and they have in Scotland they call them things like pursuers, which is really interesting, I think. And Northern Ireland again is different, with slightly different laws to England and Wales. So yes, you're quite right that we are fragmented still in that way.
Karen, what would you say to people that say, oh, hang on a minute, right, I'm hearing what Karen has to say here, and I agree in certain respects, for perhaps struggling women and all the rest of it, it makes sense to absolutely make this process easier. But what do you say to those who say, I'm really worried about the sanctity of marriage? Is marriage now entirely redundant? What's the point in getting married, some people might say?
I hear what they say. I don't think that a new piece of law in this way, which quite frankly a lot of people don't know about until they come to get divorced, I don't think that that's going to destabilise marriage. And for a long time now, I think it's fair to say, certainly during my adult lifetime, there's been no pressure to get married. If you want to live it with somebody without getting married, absolutely fine, good for you. And I think that so when people do get married, it's their decision that makes marriage important for them. And I think when it comes to issues in a relationship, that doesn't go away. The people that I see have thought really carefully and very hard about what they want to do, about separating the family and moving forward.
Yes, so
it's not
I think
a decision they take lightly.
Yeah, I think I know what you're going to say here, and I'm not Mystic Meg, but, I think I've summed you up now. But are we going then with, are you keeping it, these reforms? Are you scrapping it, or are you reforming it? Where are you at?
I am keeping it, and I'm looking for a little bit more reform on the financial side. So I'm green all the way, babe.
Yeah, I like that. Beautifully put. Karen Doveston there, Interim Chair of the Law Society Family Law Committee. Thank you very much for your time today. Now, folks, it's 2:50, and to finish the show, we're going to have our Campus Clash segment about gender neutrality. This is the idea that policies, language and other social institutions should avoid distinguishing roles according to people's sex or gender. Today's debate question is gender neutral the future? Now, I'm joined by Jess Gill, a prospective philosophy, politics and economics student, and Durham Law School student, Amia Do-Abia. Now, Jess, can I start with you, please? Gender neutral, this is the future, right? We need to just get with the times and accept gender neutral bathrooms, changing rooms and all the rest of it, because this is the way in which we're all going now.
I don't think gender neutral is the way forward. This isn't to say that men and women shouldn't be treated with the same amount of respect or shouldn't be treated the same amount, fairly. This is just simply acknowledging there's differences between men and women. Look at Leah Thomas with the sports swimming championships in the US. There's so clear there's a biological difference there, and that's why we have separate categories. But also on the matter of women's safety and even men's comfortableness and safety as well. If we have gender-neutral spaces in domestic violence centres in women's prisons, on which oftentimes these women are victims of male abuse, we're putting these women at risk and we're not making them feel comfortable.
Yeah. Amia, listening to what Jess had to say there, do you actually think this is the future and that, those that are standing saying, well, hang on a minute, I actually think that we need to protect these sex-segregated spaces and sex-segregated institutions, in fact, are just behind the times?
So the first point would be the key word over here is gender, which isn't sex. So gender is much broader. Gender is how someone identifies and then expresses themselves externally. So someone could identify as male, female, they could identify as both, or they could identify as neither. So it's important that the future is gender inclusive. And to be truly gender inclusive, we would have to be gender neutral. I don't disagree that there are majority of victims of domestic violence, for example, are females, or that a lot of professional fields are dominated by certain genders. But the key word over here is the future. So in the future, someone's opportunities that they receive or the decision that someone makes shouldn't be biased or seen through the lens of the genders, through their gender. So the future should be gender neutral. Whereas in the present, we would need to make changes to ensure that we can offer everyone a gender neutral future.
So if I tomorrow decide that Darren is now Doreen, do I have the right to walk into the women's toilets right now? Is that what you're saying?
Not right now. It depends on how you identify at that point of time. You said, right, in the future, if you identify as female, there are gender-neutral toilets available in Durham University, for example, where I study, where it's a safe space for anyone who doesn't identify as male or female, and there is an option for them to have a gender-neutral space with that regard.
So, Jess, I'm Doreen now, and I walk into the females' toilets where you just happen to be doing your makeup in the mirror or something like that. Would you feel okay with that?
I wouldn't feel okay with that, and I know plenty of other women who wouldn't feel okay with it. And I think a lot of women aren't speaking out about this because, A, they don't realise the implications. They just think gender having a different definition to sex is just respecting someone's pronouns. Of course, everyone wants to be treated and treat everyone with respect. But it comes to a point where women's safety and women and men's uncomfortableness comes into place with these situations. When you go into a women's toilet, you consent to being in an area with only women. And when you have this fluid definition of gender, you're not respecting that. You're not respecting people's consent.
Yeah, can I just ask the two of you really quickly there, because we're wrapping up the end of the show, unfortunately. But do you think that people are jumping on a bandwagon, essentially, on this debate? And actually, amongst young people, that is what's responsible for more people actually coming out and saying, well, hang on a minute, I think I'm experiencing gender dysphoria here, and that's why we're having this conversation. Is that a good thing that more people are saying, yeah, I've got gender dysphoria, this is my diagnosis? Jess?
I don't think so. I think people should be comfortable with who they are. Of course, if you're a feminine man or a masculine woman, that doesn't mean you're a different gender. That just means you're expressing yourself in a different way, and that shouldn't be discouraged. Everyone should express themselves in a different way.
Amia?
I don't think anyone needs to fit into a box that's been set out for them. If someone wants to explore out of that box, it's important they have the right and the freedom to do so.
Well, that was Jess Gill and Amia Do-Abia there. Thank you very much from Durham Law School. You've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Thank you for doing so. I'll be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock, but for now, I'll leave you with the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking bright for many, with the majority of the showers fading away. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the south-west of England, and it will be a fine end to the day here with plenty of sunshine. It will quickly begin to feel chilly though once the sun begins to set. Moving eastwards, and there could be 1 or 2 showers around first thing this evening, but these will quickly ease away, leaving clear skies. Across then into Wales, and any showers will fade away, with most of the cloud also melting away, leaving a clear but chilly evening. Any showers across the Midlands will tend to become confined to northern and eastern parts, with skies largely clear elsewhere. Once the sun sets, skies will clear further, giving a cold night for all. After an afternoon of sunshine and showers, northern England will see a dry evening with skies turning increasingly clear. Just like elsewhere, it will be a chilly end to the day with a frost forming. Moving into Scotland, and the showers will continue across some northern and eastern areas, with these wintry across the higher ground. Elsewhere, there will be some late sunshine to end the day. And Northern Ireland will also see some late sunshine, and apart from the odd, very isolated shower, it will be a dry end to the day for most. Overnight, most will be dry and clear, leading to a cold night with widespread frost developing, especially in the countryside. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Since the first Gulf War, I've covered complex conflicts around the globe. For comprehensive coverage of the ongoing situation in Ukraine, join me, Alastair Stewart, every Saturday and Sunday from noon.
If you are the most authoritarian regime, at some point they will rise up.
Which will become more dangerous.
You cannot occupy a country of that size.
And that means World War III.
That means war.
Putin did not expect that.
That's me, Alastair Stewart, from 12, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.